The coffee pot nearly shattered on the linoleum when Sophia saw it. The ring. Heavy silver vines and thorns twisted around a crowned lion identical to the one her dying mother wore on a chain against her skin, and never ever explained. The man wearing it sat in her diner like a king tolerating a slum. Dark suit, colder eyes. 2 armed guards at his back. Sophia's hands stopped shaking long enough to do the stupidest thing she'd ever done in her 24 years of surviving. She leaned forward and said it out loud. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The Thursday night shift at Rosie's Diner had a smell all its own: burnt coffee frying oil, and the particular hopelessness of a place where people came because they had nowhere better to be. Sophia Rossi had been breathing it in for 3 years, and by now she didn't notice it anymore. She noticed other things instead. The way the fluorescent light above the register flickered every 12 minutes, a countdown nobody had ever bothered to fix. The way old Joe in booth 4 nursed his decaf like it owed him something. The way her left sneaker sent a small bolt of pain up through her arch, with every step the sole having split 3 days ago, and her not having the $30 to replace them yet. She noticed those things the way people notice the details of a life that is slowly grinding them down. It was 11:42. The diner should have been closed by now, but Marlene kept the lights on an extra hour on Thursdays because the truckers from the interstate needed somewhere to argue about baseball, and arguing truckers tipped better than anyone. Sophia refilled their coffee without being asked, smiled without being prompted, and tried not to think about the stack of envelopes she'd shoved into her kitchen drawer 3 weeks ago and hadn't touched since. Her mother's medical bills had their own smell, she thought. Paper and dread. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The oncologist had said the words in that particular careful tone doctors used when they were trying not to say the other word terminal, while technically saying exactly that. There was a treatment. Experimental, promising, expensive, in a way that made Sophia laugh out loud in the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital, until the laughter curdled into something else. $250,000. She'd been working doubles for 6 months. She'd saved $11,000. She was doing the math again, the same math that never added up when the bell above the door chimed. Sophia looked up out of habit. The coffee pot in her hand nearly hit the floor. 3 men walked in, and the entire diner changed temperature. The first 2 were large in the way that suggested violence as a professional skill, broad through the shoulder, moving in that controlled, deliberate way that meant they were always assessing. Their suits were dark and precise. Their eyes swept the room the way you swept a room when you were looking for threats, not tables. One of them had a scar that cut through his left eyebrow like an old question mark. He moved immediately toward the back hallway, checking the bathroom, glancing into the kitchen. But it was the third man who stopped Sophia cold. He was tall, 6'2", 6'3", dark hair impeccably kept, a face that looked like it had been designed by someone with strong opinions about power, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a permanent line that said he hadn't genuinely smiled in years. His suit was charcoal tailored within an inch of its life, and his eyes, even from across the room, Sophia felt them. Dark, deeply set, heavy with something that had no good name. Not cruelty exactly. Something older. Something that had seen too much and decided the seeing was just the cost of being alive. He walked to a booth near the back without asking anyone where he should sit. Not the cleanest booth, not the one with the best view. The one with sightlines to both doors and no windows at his back. He sat with the ease of a man who had long since decided that every room in every city belonged to him. Marlene appeared at Sophia's elbow, her fingers closing around Sophia's wrist with surprising force. "Honey?" Marlene's voice was low and serious in a way it almost never was. "Maybe let me take that table." "It's fine." Sophia was already moving. "Tips are tips." "Sophia." Marlene's grip tightened for just a moment. "Be careful." Sophia crossed the diner, her sneakers squeaking once on the linoleum, and she hated the sound with everything she had. The 2 guards tracked her approach without moving their bodies, only their eyes. The scarred one looked through her like she was a piece of furniture. The younger one, blue-eyed and cold-faced, glanced at his boss and waited for a signal. Sophia stopped at the booth and pulled out her order pad. "Good evening." Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" The man in the center looked up. The full weight of those dark eyes hit her somewhere below the sternum, and for one disorienting second, she forgot every word she knew in English. "Coffee," he said. His voice was smooth, educated, carrying the ghost of an Italian accent that decades in America had worn down, but not erased. He said the single word the way some men said whole sentences with complete authority and zero interest in being questioned. "Black," he added. "Of course. Of course." She wrote it down. "Anything else, we have pie. The cherry is just coffee." She nodded and went back to the counter, and only when she was safely behind it did she allow herself to exhale. "Who is that?" she whispered, reaching for the best cup, the one without chips in the rim, the one they saved for special occasions that never quite came. Marlene leaned close. "Trouble. That's who that is. Don't stare, don't ask questions, and for the love of everything holy, don't say anything to irritate him." "Super helpful, Marlene. Thank you." "I mean it." Sophia poured the coffee, set the cup on a small tray, and carried it back across the diner. She was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of her own footsteps, the angle of the guard's attention, the way the room had gone slightly quieter since these men arrived, as though the air itself was being cautious. She set the cup down in front of him. And that was when she saw the ring. It was on his right index finger. Heavy silver, old silver, the kind that had darkened in its grooves from years of wearing. The design was intricate and unmistakable, vines and thorns curling around a central crest, a crowned lion with crossed swords beneath it. The craftsmanship was antique. The ring looked like it had been in someone's family for a very long time. Sophia's blood dropped 10 degrees. She knew that ring. Not a ring like it. That ring. Those exact vines. That exact lion. Those exact crossed swords. Her mother had worn one on a chain around her neck, tucked under her blouse for every single day of Sophia's 24 years. She'd worn it in the hospital. She was wearing it right now in room 417 with tubes in her arm and machines beeping her continued existence into the dark. Sophia had asked about it once when she was 7 years old. Her mother's face had done something Sophia had never been able to forget, gone distant and terrified and deeply privately sad all at once. Sophia had never asked again. "Is something wrong?" His voice cut through the fog. Sophia realized she had stopped moving and was staring at his hand. "No." Her throat felt like it was closing. Your ring. It's beautiful." The dark eyes dropped to his hand, then came back to her face. Something moved in his expression. Not warmth exactly. Assessment. Curiosity, maybe, or its dangerous cousin. "Thank you," he said. He lifted the coffee cup, dismissed her. She should have walked away. She knew she should have walked away. Every functioning survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to go refill the trucker's coffee and forget she'd ever seen it. But 6 months of medical bills were in that kitchen drawer. Her mother was in that hospital bed. The experimental treatment that might give Elena Rossi another year was sitting behind a wall of $250,000 that Sophia could not climb. "Sir," the words came out before she'd fully decided to say them, barely above a whisper. "My mother has a ring like yours." The coffee cup froze, halfway to his mouth, perfectly still, like the world had suddenly stopped rotating. The temperature in the diner dropped. The guards moved simultaneously, their hands drifting toward their jackets. The scarred one took a step toward Sophia, and the younger one was already on his feet. Even the truckers in the back sensed something, their conversation dying into confused silence. The man set his coffee cup down on the saucer with the careful precision of someone controlling a very significant impulse. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that was louder than shouting. "What did you say?" Sophia's pulse was a physical thing now slamming against her ribs. Every muscle in her body was telling her to apologize, to laugh it off, to invent something to run. She thought about her mother's face, gray against the hospital pillow. She thought about the doctor's careful voice saying without treatment, and then the pause that contained everything. "My mother," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "She has a ring exactly like that one. Same design, same crest. I've never seen another one like it anywhere." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. He looked at her. Really looked at her the way he'd looked at the room when he walked in assessing cataloging, looking for the truth beneath the surface. His dark eyes moved across her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was reading something she didn't know was written there. "Your mother's name," he said finally. Not a question. A command. "Elena." She swallowed. "Elena Rossi." He stood. He didn't move fast, didn't lurch or scramble. He simply rose from the booth like a tide coming in, unhurried and absolute, and suddenly he was standing and he was taller than she'd realized, and the air around him had changed into something she had no word for except inevitable. His face had gone completely still, carved from something harder than marble. His eyes were fixed on hers and they held something she couldn't read. Shock compressed into control, compressed into action. "Marco!" He didn't raise his voice. "Car, now!" "Boss," the scarred guard began. "Now." The authority in that single syllable silenced the room. Marco was already on his phone speaking rapid Italian. The younger guard, Luca, moved toward the door. Dante Sofia didn't know his name yet, didn't know anything yet. Turned back to her, and his eyes were burning with something that frightened her even more than the guard's guns had. "Where is she?" "St. Mary's Hospital, 4th floor. But she's very sick." Sophia's voice cracked at the edges. "The doctors, they said, you're coming with me." "I'm sorry. You're coming with me." He said it exactly the same way he'd said it the first time, with zero variation in tone, because to him, the outcome was already decided. "We're going to see your mother. And then you are going to tell me everything. I don't even know who you are." Dante Salvatore. He said it the way people said the name of a weather event, matter-of-factly, because everyone within a certain radius already understood what it meant. And maybe in the right circles, in the right parts of this city, that name cracked the world open. But Sophia was a waitress in a diner with split sneakers and a dying mother, and the name meant nothing to her. Nothing yet. "I can't just leave," she said. "I'm working. I don't have my already handled." Marco had reappeared from nowhere, and he was holding her coat, from the hook in the back room where she'd hung it 4 hours ago. "How did you—" She stared at it. "This is insane. I can't just leave with strangers. You can't just—" Dante stepped forward, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze, close enough that she could smell his cologne-expensive woody, completely wrong for a diner that smelled like frying oil and burnt coffee, and beneath it something else. Something that her nervous system identified as danger before her conscious mind could form the word. His hand came up and she flinched. He only tucked a strand of escaped hair behind her ear. The gesture was surprisingly careful, almost gentle. "Elena Rossi," he said quietly, "was promised to me 25 years ago. She disappeared the night before our wedding." His jaw tightened, something dark moving behind his eyes. "I have been looking for her ever since." The diner seemed to tilt. "That's—" Sophia heard her own voice from somewhere distant. "That's impossible. My mother never— She would have told me. Would she?" His expression was unreadable. "There is a great deal your mother hasn't told you. And tonight you are going to learn exactly who you are." He turned toward the door. Marco and Luca fell into formation around him, and around her, she realized. Like she was already part of the convoy. "Wait." She hated how small her voice sounded. "What do you mean, who I am? What does that—" He glanced back over his shoulder. In his eyes, she saw something that sent ice through her blood and heat through somewhere she didn't want to examine. Certainty. The absolute unshakable kind. "You wear your mother's face," he said. Her eyes, her defiance. He paused and something crossed his expression, possessive, dark, inevitable. If she has that ring, then you belong to me. The car was unlike anything Sophia had ever been inside. Black Mercedes windows so dark the city disappeared behind them. The seats were butter leather. The interior smelled of money, and that cologne she was already learning to associate with something primal and dangerous. She sat pressed against the far door, her order pad still clutched in her hand, like she'd forgotten to put it down. Marco drove in silence. Luca rode passenger one hand resting on his thigh in a way that was deliberately casual and suggested the exact opposite. Dante sat beside her in the dark. She could feel him without touching him. His presence filled the space with something heavy and charged, like the air before a lightning strike. "Tell me about the ring," he said. "I don't know anything about it." She stared straight ahead. She's always had it. She never talked about where it came from. She never talked about her past at all. Did she wear it openly? On a chain, under her clothes? Sophia swallowed. Hidden. A beat of silence. When was she diagnosed? 6 months ago. The familiar weight settled on her chest. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. There's a treatment experimental her doctor says it could help, but it's $250,000, and the insurance won't touch it. Her voice came out harder than she intended. I've been working doubles since August. I have 11,000 saved. She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. At this rate, I'll have enough money to pay for her funeral, not her life. Dante said nothing for a moment. How much? He asked. I just said, the full amount. How much? $250,000. She turned to look at him for the first time since getting in the car. Why are you going to write me a check out of pity? He met her eyes in the darkness. His were steady and unreadable. Answer a question for me first, he said. Your father, did Elena ever tell you about him? The old wound opened. She looked away. She said he left before I was born, that he didn't want us. A pause. She wouldn't give me a name. Said it didn't matter. Said we didn't need him. The silence from his side of the car was different now. Waited. She could feel him thinking, calculating something she didn't have enough information to understand. I'm not going to apologize, she said sharply, for asking about the ring. I know I probably shouldn't have said anything. But my mother is dying, and she won't tell me anything, and I saw that crest, and I... Her voice gave out for one beat. I just needed to know if it meant something. It means everything, he said quietly. He leaned forward, and the passing streetlights caught his face in fragments, the sharp angle of his jaw, the hard line of his mouth. Elena Rossi and I were betrothed. It was arranged between our families 3 generations ago. The rings were made as a matching pair given to the betrothed couple as a seal, a promise in metal. He paused. The night before our wedding, she disappeared. She took $3 million from my family's accounts money, meant for a significant transaction, and she vanished without a word. His voice was controlled, but beneath the control, she could hear something else. Ancient and still raw. I was 28 years old. I spent years searching for her. And then I stopped searching because searching was destroying me. But I never forgot, and I never forgave. Sophia sat very still. $3 million, she said slowly. Yes. And you think what she owes you, I owe you. She turned to face him, fully anger cutting through the fear. Whatever she did 25 years ago, it has nothing to do with me. I was born into whatever mess this is. I didn't choose it. I'm not responsible for... In my world, he said very calm, debts pass through blood until they're settled. The air left her lungs. That's not how the world works, she managed. It's how my world works. He held her gaze without apology. The Rossi family and the Salvatore family were bound for 3 generations. That bond was broken by betrayal, and betrayal... He stopped. Something moved across his face. There's something else. Something your mother may not have told you. Something I need to verify before I say another word. He turned to look out the window, his jaw tight. We'll talk more after I've seen her. The hospital loomed ahead, its lights harsh and white. The fourth floor of St. Mary's was dim and quiet at midnight, most of its rooms dark. The nurses' station held one young woman typing on a computer who looked up at their group, did a rapid assessment of Dante and his guards, and decided she had not seen anything. Room 417. Sophia hesitated at the door with her hand on the handle. "She's sleeping," she said. "The medications make her tired. She needs—" "Open it." Sophia opened it. The room was dark, except for the blue glow of the monitor. Elena Rossi lay small in the hospital bed, her body barely displacing the sheets. She'd lost 30 pounds since the diagnosis. Her dark hair, which had once been thick and beautiful, had thinned to something fragile. Her collarbones jutted with a sharpness that hurt to look at. Around her neck on a simple chain was the ring. Dante saw it immediately. He moved past Sophia with the quiet certainty of a man who had waited 25 years for this specific moment and had decided some time ago that he was done rushing. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at Elena Rossi, at the ruin the illness had made of her, and he was silent for a long time. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide. It was complicated and old and full of things Sophia had no right to understand. "Elena," he said softly. Her mother's eyes opened, groggy at first, confused, then focused. And then her face did something Sophia had never seen it do. Every trace of color drained away, every muscle went rigid. Her eyes, her blue eyes. Sophia's eyes went wide and black with a terror so complete and so immediate that Sophia's hand shot out to grip the wall. "No." Her mother's voice was a breath, a cracked, desperate breath. "No, no, no. Hello, mia promessa." Dante's Italian was quiet and honey-slow and utterly pitiless. "It has been a long time." "Dante." His name came out of her mother's throat like something being torn. "Please, please, I can explain, I can—" 25 years, Elena." He moved around the bed slowly, and his voice stayed soft, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. 25 years I have been looking for you. Do you understand what that does to a man? To wake up on his wedding day and find his bride gone. To not know for months whether you were dead somewhere or whether you had chosen to leave. He stopped beside her. And then to find out slowly, carefully, that you had chosen. That you had walked away with $3 million of my family's money and built yourself a life somewhere else. A pause. While I buried what you did in the only place I could find to put it. Tears poured silently down Elena's face. Her hand gripped the chain around her neck. "I had to," she whispered. "You don't understand. I had to." "Mom." Sophia moved to the bedside, her voice cracking on the word. "Mom, what is he talking about? What does he mean? What money? What did you do?" Elena looked at her daughter, and the guilt in her eyes was the most honest thing Sophia had ever seen on a human face. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to know any of this." "What happened?" Sophia demanded. "Tell me right now, all of it." Elena closed her eyes, opened them, looked at her daughter with something beyond guilt, with the particular pain of a secret that has been carried so long it has become part of the body itself. "I was pregnant," she said. The word fell into the room, and nothing was the same afterward. Dante went absolutely still. "I found out the week before the wedding." Elena continued, her voice breaking on every other word. "I was carrying you, Sophia. And I looked at his world, the violence, the blood, the constant danger, and I knew. I knew what your life would be. What I would be bringing you into if I stayed. So I took the money from his father's safe and I ran. And I gave you a normal life. A safe life. Normal." Sophia heard her own voice from somewhere outside herself. "We've been poor my entire life. We've been scared and struggling, and I've been working since I was 16 years old. And you call that—" "You were alive," Elena said. "That's what I call that. You were alive and no one was threatening to use you against your father and no one was coming for you in the night. That's what normal meant to me." The room was silent for 3 full seconds. And then Dante spoke. "You were pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a world reorganizing itself. Elena looked at him with the resigned expression of someone who has run out of roads. Yes. Another silence. You are telling me. Dante said each word separated from the last by a careful pause. That you ran from me carrying my child. Yes. That I have had a daughter for 24 years and knew nothing about her. Yes. That you stole my money, disappeared with my blood, my heir. His voice stayed controlled, but the words came out stripped of everything except their core. And you have been living in my city for 6 months. Elena flinched. We were in California for years. I changed our names, paid cash, moved constantly. But when I got sick, the treatment centers in California couldn't work with me on payments. I thought enough time had passed. I thought you might have moved on. Dante's laugh was the coldest sound Sophia had ever heard from a human being. The Salvatores, he said, do not move on. He turned to Marco, who had been standing motionless in the doorway. Call Giovanni. I need a DNA test. Tonight. Wait. Sophia stepped forward. You can't just, I don't consent to. Dante's hand shot out and caught her chin. Not hard enough to hurt, firm enough to hold. His eyes locked with hers, and up close, this close, she could see something in them that went far beyond anger. Something that looked almost like grief compressed into diamond. Look at your face, he said quietly. Look at your jaw, your eyes, your brows. He released her. You've been walking around with my face your entire life and you didn't know it. He stepped back. The test is a formality, I already know. He turned back to Elena. The treatment, for the cancer, how much? Elena blinked. Dante, How much, Elena? 250,000. Elena's voice was barely sound. But you don't have to. It will be arranged by morning. He said it the way he said everything, as settled fact reality bending to accommodate his decision. She is the mother of my child. That makes her family. And I protect what is mine. He looked at Sophia, and his dark eyes held something new now, something that hadn't been there in the diner, something layered and raw and enormous. You're coming home with me. I don't know you, Sophia said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were steady. I don't care what a DNA test says. You're not my father. I am your father, he said with the same quiet finality with which he said everything. And if that test comes back with the result we both already know, it will your life as you know it is over. You will come to my home. You will be protected. You will learn everything there is to know about who you actually are. He moved to the door. And Sophia. He stopped with his back to her, his voice dropping to something that was almost soft. Don't waste time planning to run. Your mother tried that once. He glanced back over his shoulder, just his eyes dark and certain and ancient. It took me 25 years, but I found her. The door closed with a quiet click. Sophia stood in the dim room. Her mother wept silently into the pillow. And somewhere below, in the hospital parking lot, Dante Salvatore was already making plans for the daughter he'd just discovered. The daughter who, whether she wanted it or not, had just inherited a war. Sophia didn't sleep that night. Not a single hour. She sat in the chair beside her mother's bed with her fingers wrapped around Elena's hand, and Elena talked. She talked the way people talk when they've been holding something inside for so long that the weight of it has become structural. When releasing it feels like demolishing a wall you built to keep yourself standing. She talked until her voice went thin and her eyes went glassy from the medication pulling at her, and even then she kept talking like silence had become the thing she was most afraid of. She told Sophia about the arrangement. Two families, the Rossis and the Salvatores, bound together across 3 generations by something older than affection, by strategy, by blood, by the particular logic of men who built empires and needed alliances to hold them. Elena had grown up knowing she would marry Dante Salvatore, had grown up understanding it the way children understand gravity, not as a choice, but as a condition of existing in the world she'd been born into. "Did you love him?" Sophia asked, and the question surprised them both. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I could. He wasn't cruel, not to me. He was attentive, careful, but I could see what he was becoming, what the life was making him, and I thought I can survive this. I can build something inside it." Her fingers tightened around Sophia's. "And then I found out I was pregnant, and everything changed." "Why didn't you tell him?" "Because if I told him I stayed, and if I stayed you grew up inside that world. Every threat he ever made, every enemy he ever created, they would have come for you. Children of men like Dante aren't children. They're leverage. They're targets." She stopped, drew a careful breath. "I couldn't do that to you." "So you took $3 million instead." The words came out flatter than Sophia intended. Elena flinched. "It was meant for a weapons purchase," Elena said quietly. "Blood money. I told myself it wasn't stealing. I told myself I was taking back something the world owed us." A pause. "I was 23 years old and terrified. I didn't think very clearly." "And now he's going to pay for your cancer treatment." "Sophia. And he's going to take me with him." She said it plainly because plainness was all she had left. "And there is nothing either of us can do about it." Elena looked at her daughter with eyes that had been crying for so long they'd gone past tears into something drier and more devastating. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Baby, I am so sorry. I thought running would protect you. I thought distance would protect you. I didn't. I never thought that he'd find us, that he'd find you." Sophia sat with that for a moment. The monitors beeped. Down the hall, a door closed. "Tell me one true thing," Sophia said finally. "One thing about him that isn't about what he does, or what he owns, or how dangerous he is. Tell me something true." Elena closed her eyes. "When he loves someone," she said slowly, "he loves them completely, without reservation, without limit." She opened her eyes. That was the terrifying part. Not that he was violent, but that he would have loved you so much, and the world around that love would have been so brutal, and I didn't know which would have destroyed you first. Sophia left the hospital at 5:30 in the morning, taking the first bus toward her neighborhood as the city came alive around her. She sat in the back with her forehead against the cold window and watched streets she had walked her entire life slide past her, and they looked exactly the same, and she felt like a stranger in all of it. Her phone buzzed before she reached her stop. Unknown number. She answered it before she could decide not to. "Marco will collect you at noon," said the voice on the other end. Not Marco's voice. His. "You could have texted," she said. "I wanted to hear your voice," Dante said. "To confirm you hadn't run." "I thought about it." "I know. Did you decide against it on your own, or did your mother talk you out of it?" She hated that he already knew her well enough to ask that question. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. I want to know if you're choosing this or simply submitting to it. Those aren't the same thing to you." A brief silence. "No, they are not. I haven't decided which one it is yet." "Fair enough." Another pause, and then something in his voice shifted by a degree still controlled, but underneath the control, something raw. "The DNA results will be back by morning. But Sophia, I want you to hear this from me directly, before the paperwork, before everything else. I knew the moment I looked at your face in that diner. I knew before you said a single word about any ring." He stopped, started again. "You have my jaw. My mother's eyes, but my jaw. My grandmother's way of going very still when you're trying to control something you can't control." Another pause. "I spent 25 years thinking the worst thing Elena did to me was the money. I was wrong. The worst thing she did to me was you, keeping you from me." His voice dropped to something that was barely more than breath. "Don't run, Sophia, please." She sat on the bus with her phone pressed hard against her ear and said nothing for a long moment. "Noon," she said finally. And she hung up. Her apartment looked smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed when she pushed open the door. Not that anything had changed, but that she was seeing it differently. The water stains on the ceiling, the radiator that clanked and spit, the second-hand furniture she'd been meaning to replace for 2 years and never had the money. Dante had called it pathetic, and standing inside it now, she felt the particular shame of seeing your own life through someone else's eyes, the eyes of someone for whom poverty is an abstraction rather than a daily calculation. She showered. She stood under the weak spray until the water went cold, and then she stood there a little longer because she wasn't ready to step out and make decisions. When she finally dried off and looked at herself in the spotted bathroom mirror, she stood there for a long time, studying her own face, her jaw, the angle of it, the way it was slightly too sharp for her otherwise soft features. She'd always thought it was just the way she'd turned out. She'd never had a reference point for where it came from. She packed a bag, not much, a few changes of clothes. Her mother's photograph, the one from 8 years ago, when Elena was still healthy, her dark hair thick, her smile still certain. The small necklace Elena had given her on her 18th birthday, a thin chain with a single blue stone. She didn't know what to bring to a life she couldn't yet imagine, so she brought only what meant something. Marco arrived at exactly noon. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't need to. Sophia locked her apartment door, stood on the landing for 3 seconds, looking at the number on the door, and then she went downstairs. The drive moved them through neighborhoods she'd never had reason to visit. The city shifted around her, the streets growing cleaner, the buildings taller and more certain of themselves, the distance between people and their money narrowing until it disappeared entirely. They crossed into Gramercy, and the townhouse on the corner was exactly the kind of building that made you understand, without anyone saying a word, that you had arrived somewhere designed to remind you of your own smallness. 4 stories, honey-colored stone, black door with brass fixtures, 2 men outside in dark suits tracking the car with their eyes as they pulled up. Marco finally spoke. "Mr. Salvatore is waiting inside." She followed him in. The interior was the physical form of power that didn't need to announce itself. Marble underfoot, art on the walls that she recognized from photographs in textbooks, pieces that belonged in museums hanging here like punctuation. A chandelier that caught the light and turned it into something almost aggressive. She kept her face neutral and her shoulders back because she had spent enough years invisible to know that the moment you let a room see it rattling you, you had already lost something. A severe older woman in gray Maria appeared and led her upstairs to Dante's office without ceremony. She knocked. "Enter." He was at his desk jacket off sleeves rolled to the forearm, reading something on his laptop with a glass of scotch at his elbow. He looked like a man who had slept 2 hours and didn't particularly care. When he looked up at Sophia, the first thing he did was assess her the way he'd assessed the diner, quickly, completely cataloging everything. "Sit," he said. She sat. "The DNA results came back 40 minutes ago." He folded his hands on the desk. 99.9% certainty. He let that sit between them for a moment. "You're mine. You said it wasn't going to be a surprise." "I said it was a formality." "It was." He rose from behind the desk and moved around it, leaning against the edge closer to her. The shift in proximity was deliberate. She understood that about him now, that he used physical space the way he used silence, as a form of authority. "So now we begin." "Begin what exactly?" "Your education." He picked up a folder from the corner of the desk and held it out to her. She took it. Inside were 2 sheets, a profile. Her profile. Name, address, employment, education history, dropped out of community college 2 years prior. Medical debt, her mother's diagnosis. Everything. "I had this prepared before we ever arrived at the hospital last night," he said. "I knew who you were within 30 minutes of leaving the diner." Sophia looked up from the papers. The chill came fast. "You were already watching my mother." Something crossed his expression. "I told you I've known where Elena was for 6 months. I chose to wait until the moment was right to make contact." He studied Sophia's face. "I see that bothers you." "You let her sit in that hospital for 6 months," Sophia said carefully. "Knowing. While I worked doubles and we couldn't afford, I needed to understand what I was walking into." His voice stayed even. I needed to know who you were before I revealed myself. These are not decisions made in haste in my world. Haste gets people killed. 6 months is a long time to watch someone's mother die by degrees. She's not dead. He said it hard and direct. And she won't be. The treatment protocol started this morning. Dr. Richardson is the best in the country. Your mother will have everything she needs. He paused. That is not nothing, Sophia. She hated that it wasn't. She hated that gratitude was threading itself through her anger, undermining it at the joints. She set the folder back on the desk. What are the rules? He looked at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. Like he'd been expecting her to argue, and she had surprised him by being practical instead. You don't leave this house without Marco or Luca. You don't contact anyone from your previous life without my knowledge. You attend every lesson I arrange. Languages, self-defense, the family business. He held her gaze. And when I give you an instruction, you follow it. Not because I enjoy authority over you, but because in this world, the gap between following and not following an instruction can be the gap between alive and not. And if I break the rules, then I remind you, he said quietly, that I am not only your father, I am the head of this family. These are not separate facts. She sat with that. Outside the window, the private garden was still and bright. Inside this room, she could feel the weight of a life rearranging itself around her, whether she consented to the rearrangement or not. One condition, she said. He raised an eyebrow. My mother. When she's strong enough to leave the hospital, she comes here. She's not left somewhere alone. Sophia held his gaze. I don't care what she did to you. She's my mother. That's not negotiable. Something moved through his eyes, complicated and layered. He held her stare for a beat. 2. Then he nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. Agreed. Then we have a deal. He studied her for another long moment, and this time, what she saw in his face wasn't assessment. It was something that looked almost like recognition, like seeing a reflection in an unexpected place. You're going to be formidable, he said, almost to himself. I've always been formidable, Sophia said. I just never had any resources. That did it. Something genuinely shifted in his expression. The jaw softened by a fraction, the eyes warmed by a degree. Not a smile exactly, but the infrastructure of one. He called Maria and had Sophia's room prepared. It was the size of her entire apartment, and she stood in the middle of it for 3 minutes after Maria left, breathing carefully before she allowed herself to sit on the edge of the enormous bed and stare at the ceiling and think. Her phone buzzed. The new one, sleek and expensive, appeared on the nightstand as if conjured. The number was Dante's. Dinner at 7. Don't keep me waiting. She typed back. Is that a request or an order? The reply came in under 10 seconds. In this house, they're the same thing. She almost smiled. She didn't let herself. The days that followed moved at a pace that left no room for the kind of thinking that made you spiral. Victor the Russian met her in the basement gym every morning at 6 and proceeded to dismantle every assumption she'd had about her own body. He wasn't unkind. He was simply honest in a way that physical training doesn't allow you to be dishonest about. She was weak. She was untrained, and weakness in her position wasn't a personal failing. It was a security risk. You flinch when you anticipate contact, he told her on the 3rd morning, circling her on the mat. In real situation, flinch gets you hurt. You must move before your brain finishes its question. That's easy to say. Everything is easy to say. He lunged without warning. She moved not cleanly, not gracefully, but she moved, stepped inside his reach, drove her elbow upward the way he'd shown her, felt him absorb the impact and grunt in something like approval. Better, he said. You moved because your body knew. Trust your body more than your thoughts. Thoughts are too slow. Breakfast with Dante at 7:30. Every morning without exception. He read a physical newspaper, an actual printed newspaper, and he asked her questions about whatever Victor had covered the day before, whatever Giovanni had taught her about the family structure, whatever language lesson Isabella had drilled into her. The questions felt like exams. She learned quickly that wrong answers were less about failure and more about information he wanted to know what she still needed to understand. "Don Carmine Russo," he said one morning, sliding a photograph across the table. "Tell me what you see." "Friendly face, open body language, looks like someone's grandfather. He's killed more men than you've met in your lifetime." Dante folded his newspaper. "But you're right about the body language. He values relationships above almost everything. Approach him with genuine respect, not performed respect. He can tell the difference. Acknowledge his history, and never give him reason to doubt your loyalty. He's been an ally of this family for 30 years. He moved to the next photo, a younger man, dark-eyed with a smile that didn't reach anything behind it. "Marco Moretti." Sophia studied the face, filed it. "What's his weakness?" "His need to prove himself. His father was a careful man. Marco took over 2 years ago and has spent every day since trying to establish that he's not careful, that he's something more dangerous than careful." Dante's voice was steady, analytical, like a professor walking through a case study. "Pride is a weakness you can use. It makes men predictable. A predictable enemy is a manageable enemy. And an unpredictable one is the only kind worth being afraid of." He met her eyes. "Which is why they're afraid of me." She believed it completely and found to her own complicated discomfort that she didn't find it entirely repellent. 8 days in, everything cracked open. It was late, nearly 11, and Sophia was in her room reviewing the family maps Giovanni had given her that afternoon. Territories, alliances, the geography of power. When her door opened and Marco appeared, his face tight with controlled urgency. "Your father needs you. Now." Dante's office held more people than she'd seen in it before 3 men she recognized from her lessons. 2, she didn't, all of them coiled with the particular tension of something having gone wrong. Dante stood behind his desk, and the stillness in his face was its own kind of alarm. He looked at her when she entered, and for a fraction of a second, something moved through his expression that she hadn't seen from him before. It was gone, almost instantly buried under control, but she'd seen it. Fear, not for himself. "Someone made a move on your mother's hospital tonight," he said. The floor shifted under her. "What?" 3 men, 4th floor. "My security team stopped them before they reached her room. She's unharmed." He watched her absorb this. "But she's being moved, tonight, to a private facility with full security coverage." "Who?" Sophia said. Her own voice sounded strange to her, flat and cold, in a way she didn't recognize. "Moretti." He said it without hesitation. "Marco, he's testing me. Looking for pressure points. He used my mother as a pressure point." "Yes. Because of me. Because of me." He came around the desk, stopping in front of her. "Don't do that. Don't take that weight. This is not your fault. This is Marco Moretti deciding that threatening what I love is a viable strategy." He stopped. Something flickered across his face at the word he'd just used easily, naturally, and he didn't retract it. He was wrong about that. She looked at him. The anger in her chest was enormous and clean and clarifying. "What are you going to do? What I always do when someone crosses a line." His voice was quiet and utterly certain. "I make sure the crossing is the last decision they make." He turned back to his men and began giving orders in rapid Italian. She caught enough of it now to understand the shape of what was coming, even if she missed individual words. Positions, movements. A name spoken once with a particular finality that told her the conversation attached to that name was already over. When the men had cleared out, Dante stood with his hands flat on the desk, looking at nothing for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You're angry," he said. "Yes." "Good." He straightened. "Hold on to it. Not the panic, the anger. Panic makes you reactive. Anger controlled makes you strategic." He paused. "Are you going to fall apart?" She thought about that honestly. About her mother's face. About 3 men on the 4th floor of St. Mary's who had walked toward room 417 with intentions she couldn't afford to think about too directly. "No," she said. "Are you certain?" "I'm furious," she said. "That's not the same thing as falling apart." And something happened in Dante Salvatore's face then that she would think about later alone in the dark of her enormous room, something that looked like relief and pride, compressed into the same expression, like a man recognizing something he had feared might not be there, and discovering that it was. That it had been there all along. "No," he said softly. "It certainly is not." He crossed to the sidebar and poured 2 glasses of water, not scotch, not wine, and handed her one. She took it. They stood on opposite sides of the desk in the quiet that followed, and it was the first moment since the diner that hadn't felt like a negotiation or a test or a performance of something. It just felt like 2 people in the same room, holding the same anger pointed in the same direction. "Tomorrow," he said, "we send a message." "What kind of message?" He looked at her over the rim of his glass. His dark eyes were steady and ancient, and certain in a way that she was starting God help her to find familiar. "The kind," he said, "that doesn't require words." The message arrived before dawn. Not a text, a photograph. Marco found it on Dante's encrypted line at 4:47 in the morning and brought it to him without a word of explanation because the photograph didn't need any. Dante looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he set his phone face down on the desk with the careful precision of a man deciding not to break something. Sophia was already awake. She'd barely slept. When Marco knocked on her door 20 minutes later and told her Dante needed her downstairs, she was already dressed. The photograph was of Marco Moretti's cousin. Late 20s, slumped against a wall, his eyes open and empty. On the wall above him in red spray paint the words were direct and without flourish. "Touch my family again. This is mercy." Sophia stood in the office and looked at the photograph and waited for the horror to arrive. She waited for her stomach to turn, for her legs to go weak, for the part of her that had grown up in a world where violence existed only on television to assert itself and demand she recoil. It didn't come. What came instead was cold, clean recognition. These men had walked toward her mother's hospital room with intentions that didn't require spelling out. Whatever had happened to them afterward was a transaction she understood at a level below argument. "You should be upset," Dante said. He was watching her face the way he watched everything, with total attention, cataloging every micro-expression. "You already said that to me last night." Last night was theoretical. This morning is specific. She set the photograph back on the desk. "He went after my mother. She's dying of cancer, and he sent men to her hospital room." She met Dante's eyes. "I'm not upset. I'm satisfied." Is that the right answer? There is no right answer. I'm trying to understand who you are. I'm figuring that out myself. She pulled out the chair across from his desk and sat without being invited to. What happens now? Giovanni appeared in the doorway before Dante could answer. His silver hair was immaculate even at 5 in the morning, which told Sophia something about the kind of life these men had built, one in which crisis was simply the normal operating condition. "The Moretti situation is escalating," he said. "Marco isn't going to absorb this quietly. He'll need to respond publicly or lose face with his own people." "Let him respond," Dante said. "He may escalate beyond posturing. Then he escalates and I end it." Dante's voice was matter-of-fact. "Call the 5 families. I want a meeting tonight. Neutral ground." He looked at Sophia. "You're coming." She didn't hesitate. "Obviously." Giovanni's eyebrow moved a fraction of an inch, the closest he came to expressing surprise she was learning. He looked at Dante. Something passed between them that she couldn't fully read yet. Dante gave a small nod, and Giovanni left. "You'll wear the black dress," Dante said, turning back to his laptop. "And the pearls." "Are you telling me how to dress?" "I'm telling you how to present yourself in a room full of men who will decide in the first 90 seconds whether you are an asset or a liability." He looked up. "You can be insulted by that, or you can use it. Choose." She chose. Maria had the black dress pressed and ready by 6. The pearls were real and heavy and cold against her throat. When Sophia looked at herself in the full-length mirror before dinner, the woman looking back at her was someone she recognized only partially. Her own eyes, her own jaw, but framed by something she'd never had access to before. Certainty. The visual language of it anyway. Dante was waiting at the base of the stairs. He looked up when she descended, and something moved across his face: approval, possession, the complicated satisfaction of a man seeing a plan come together. He offered his arm without comment, and she took it without hesitation, and together, they walked out into the city that he owned, and she was only beginning to understand. The restaurant was in Little Italy, and the private room in the back held 6 men who rose when Dante entered. The way men rose for a head of state automatically without thinking, because the body understood authority before the mind caught up. Sophia catalogued them as she'd been taught. Don Carmine Russo, with his grandfather's face and his assassin's history. Don Castellano, thin and hawk-angled, and allied with the Moretti family in ways that had always been more transactional than loyal. 4 others whose names she'd memorized from photographs, and whose eyes now moved over her with the calculating assessment of people determining her value. And at the far end of the table, the one she'd been looking for since they walked in, Marco Moretti. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30. Dark-eyed, jaw set with the rigid pride of someone who knows he's walked into a room where he's already losing and refuses to adjust his posture to acknowledge it. He looked at Sophia the way men look at things they've decided to underestimate, and she filed that away and kept her face neutral. "Gentlemen?" Dante's hand settled on the small of her back. "Allow me to introduce my daughter, Sophia Salvatore." The name hit the room differently than she expected. Not shock exactly, they'd been told she understood that. But hearing it spoken in this room by this man with her standing beside him, that produced something. She watched it move through the table, like a current watched each face register it and then compose itself. Don Russo moved first. He came around the table with his warm grandfather's smile and took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Your daughter, Dante." He said, his sharp eyes moving between them with open curiosity. "She has your strength. I can see it already." "She has more than that," Dante said. A quiet warning wrapped in a compliment. They sat. Food appeared. The conversation moved through business territories: a shipment arriving next week, a dispute about union payments on the east side, and the men spoke sometimes in English, sometimes in Italian, and Sophia understood more of the Italian than they expected her to, which was exactly the point. She'd been studying for 10 days, with the focused desperation of someone who understood that information was survival. She caught Castellano saying quietly to the man beside him in Italian that the girl was an unknown variable, that bringing an outsider into the family structure was a risk Dante had never taken before. She leaned slightly toward Dante and murmured in English, low enough that only he heard, "Castellano thinks I'm a liability." Dante's expression didn't change. He reached for his wine glass. "I know. Should I be worried about him? Not yet. Watch how he treats you by the end of dinner." Men like Castellano adjust their opinion based on how the room moves. If the room moves toward you, he'll move with it. He took a slow sip. Give the room a reason to move. It was Don Russo who gave her the opening, asking her what she'd made of the city since she'd arrived, genially conversationally, the way men asked questions, when they were actually examining your answer for structural integrity rather than content. Sophia smiled, and said she'd always known her city from the ground up, and was now learning it from a different altitude, and that the view from both had value, but the ground level told you things the altitude couldn't. Russo laughed with genuine warmth. Castellano's eyes sharpened by a degree. Marco Moretti at the other end of the table looked at her like she'd said something personally offensive. Then Dante's phone buzzed. She felt him go still beside her, not visibly, not in any way the table could read, but she felt it through his arm pressed against hers. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened by the smallest possible fraction. He leaned down to her. "Someone made a second move on the hospital." His voice was barely breath. "They got as far as the lobby before my men intercepted. Your mother is being moved to the private facility right now. She's safe." He held her eyes. "Do not react." The effort that took was the hardest thing she'd done in 10 days of hard things. She looked back at the table. She picked up her fork. She asked Don Russo something about the union situation and listened to his answer and nodded in the right places. And under the table, her free hand gripped the edge of her seat with enough force that her knuckles ached. Dante excused himself briefly. When he returned 4 minutes later, his face was composed and his eyes were the temperature of January. He sat down and touched her shoulder once, a brief, deliberate pressure that said handled. The dinner ended cordially. It wasn't until the men were filing toward the exit that Marco Moretti slowed at Sophia's chair. He waited until Dante was 3 steps ahead, exchanging parting words with Russo, and then he leaned slightly toward Sophia and said it quietly with the focused poison of someone who had been holding it all evening. "You think you're safe because he's here," Marco said. "But men like your father don't live forever, little girl. And when he's gone, you'll find out exactly what pretenders to this life are worth." Sophia looked at him. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She let him hold eye contact with her for 2 full seconds, and then she said very calmly, "Say that again a little louder. I want to make sure he hears you." She watched the calculation move through Marco's eyes. The realization that she wasn't afraid, that she'd just handed him a choice, and she watched him decide. And she watched him decide wrong. He didn't repeat it. He stepped back and walked toward the exit. And Dante, who had heard every word despite the distance, was already moving. She didn't see him cross the room. One moment he was at the door with Russo, and the next he had Marco Moretti by the throat against the edge of the table, a gun pressed under Marco's chin, the whole motion so fast and controlled that several men in the room simply froze. "Say it again." Dante's voice was the quietest she'd ever heard it, which meant it was the most dangerous she'd ever heard it. "Threaten my daughter one more time. I am sincerely asking you to give me a reason." Marco's face went from dark to purple. His guards moved and then stopped when Dante's men raised their own weapons, and the room became very clear about its geometry. "Dante." Don Russo, to his credit, didn't panic. His voice was steady and measured. "Let him go. The boy made a mistake." The silence that followed lasted no longer than 5 seconds. It felt like 5 minutes. Then Dante released him. Marco collapsed against the table, gasping, and Dante stepped back with the controlled calm of someone who has made a decision and is entirely at peace with it. He didn't look at Marco again. He looked at Sophia. "Are you all right?" "Yes." He held her gaze for one more beat, checking for the truth of it, and then he said to Marco's guards, without looking at them, "Get him out of my sight before I change my mind." They did. The ride back was quiet. Dante sat beside her in the dark of the car, and for once didn't speak, and she didn't fill the silence because she was beginning to understand that his silences were not empty. They were where he did his thinking, and interrupting them was a form of rudeness she chose not to commit. When they reached the townhouse, he poured himself scotch, with hands that held the faintest tremor barely visible, and she thought, this is what caring costs him. The control is enormous, and the cost is physical. "You need to understand something," he said, still not looking at her. "Tell me." "What?" Marco said. "He is not wrong." He finally turned. "I'm 53. I've been in this life since I was 15 years old. The stress of it, the violence of it, it accumulates. It changes the body. I have enemies who have been waiting 20 years for a moment of weakness." He set the glass down. "When I'm gone, this family needs to hold. And the only way it holds is if you are strong enough, knowledgeable enough, and feared enough to make holding it possible. Don't talk about being gone. I have to." His voice was firm. "Because you are the reason I have to. Before you, there was no one I trusted to carry this. Now there is. And that means I need you ready. Not someday. Soon." He came around the desk and stood in front of her. "Your mother ran because this life frightened her. I do not blame her. It should frighten people. But you—" He stopped. Something in his face shifted. "You stood in that room tonight with men who have ordered murders, and you held your ground, and you read the room, and you used what I taught you. Do you understand what that means? That I'm a quick learner, that you were always meant for this." He put his hand on her shoulder, heavy and certain. "I lost 24 years with you, Sophia. I cannot recover them. But I can make sure that the years I have left count for something." He paused. "I'm going to teach you everything. Not just the politics and the strategy. Everything. How to read a room, how to hold power without letting it corrode you, how to know when mercy is strength and when it's weakness. Another pause, quieter. How to survive me. She looked at him for a long time. At the man who had ordered violence tonight and held her hand under a dinner table and pressed a gun under a young man's chin because that young man had threatened his daughter. At the man who was by any objective measure a monster, and who was also, by the evidence of the last 10 days, the most present and attentive and fiercely committed person she had ever had in her corner. "You said you're not a good man," she said. "I'm not. No." She agreed with him simply, without judgment. "But you're a good father. I think those two things are going to be very difficult to hold at the same time." He was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother said something similar," he said finally. "The night I met her, we were 19. She told me I had the capacity for great love and great destruction, and that one day they would come into direct conflict." He exhaled slowly. "She wasn't wrong. She usually isn't," Sophia said. "That's one of the more irritating things about her." And Dante Salvatore did something she hadn't seen him do yet. He laughed. Not the cold, sharp sound from the hospital. A real one. Brief, surprised, genuine. It crossed his face and was gone quickly, like he wasn't entirely sure what to do with it, but it had been real, and she filed it away in the same place she filed everything that mattered. The next morning brought a shift she felt before she could name it. The house was different, not in any way she could point to, but in the way that charged air before a storm is different from ordinary air. Men moved through hallways with too much purpose. Conversations stopped a beat too quickly when she entered rooms. Marco found her after breakfast with his jaw set and his eyes careful, and she stopped walking before he said a word. "What happened?" she asked. "Moretti hit the Ravello warehouse last night, 3 hours ago." He met her eyes. "4 of our men are dead, $500,000 in product gone." The weight of it landed cleanly. 4 men. Not abstractions, men she'd seen in this house. Men who'd nodded to her in hallways and held doors and stood guard outside rooms where she was learning to become someone new. "Marco Moretti declared war officially," he continued. "Your father has called a strategy session. He needs you in the office. Now." She was moving before he finished the sentence. Dante's office held 7 people, all of them standing, all of them vibrating with the compressed energy of a situation that had just crossed a threshold. Giovanni was at the desk maps spread open. Luca stood by the window. 3 men she recognized as senior level from her family structure lessons were positioned around the room. Dante stood at the center of it. And when he turned and looked at her, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not fear, but the face beneath the control. Raw. Tired. The face of a man who has been at war so long that war has become the architecture of his entire interior world, and who has finally found something he is afraid to lose. He recovered it in under a second. "The Moretti family has formalized their position," he said. "This is no longer provocation. This is open conflict." He looked at Giovanni. "Pull our people back from the border territories. I don't want anyone exposed." Then to Luca. "Double the detail on the private facility. No one enters without my direct authorization." Then to Sophia. "You are going underground until this is resolved." "No," she said. The room went quiet. "Sophia, you told me I'm your heir." She held his gaze without blinking. "You spent 10 days telling me that I needed to understand this life in full, that hiding from it wasn't an option, that strength was the only currency that mattered in your world." She took a step forward. "You were right about all of that. So don't contradict yourself now because you're scared." The silence held for 5 full seconds. Not an uncomfortable silence, a weighted one. Every person in the room was doing the math of who these 2 people were to each other and what that meant for what happened next. "She stays," Dante said. His voice was quiet, final. He looked at her with something that was close to pain and close to pride, and didn't fully resolve into either. "She stays, And she does exactly what I say exactly when I say it. Understood. Understood, Sophia said. Giovanni exhaled. One of the other men made a sound that might have been approval. Luca by the window turned back to the street with something that might on another face have been a smile. Dante turned back to the maps. Then let's finish this. The strategy session lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes, and by the end of it, Sophia understood something about war that no lesson with Giovanni had managed to teach her. War, at this level, was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was precision applied to destruction. Every move calculated 3 moves ahead. Every resource accounted for every human being on both sides reduced temporarily to a variable in an equation that had only 2 possible outcomes. One side standing, one side not. Dante worked the room like a conductor, each instruction landing with the flat certainty of someone who had done this before and knew which decisions saved lives and which ones wasted them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform authority. He simply had it the way gravity simply exists, and everyone in that room organized themselves around it without being asked. Sophia watched and memorized and said nothing unless directly addressed, and when she was addressed, she answered with the information she had, and twice Dante used what she said to adjust a decision, and both times he did it without acknowledging that he'd used it, which she understood was not dismissal. It was incorporation. She was already being folded into the thinking. By noon, the room had thinned to Dante, Giovanni, Marco, Luca, and Sophia. The maps on the desk were covered in Giovanni's handwriting, notations, positions, timing. The plan was clean, surgical. Dante had spent 20 years building intelligence networks inside every family in the city, and the information those networks had produced about Marco Moretti's operations was thorough enough to be devastating. He's running his command out of a warehouse in Red Hook, Giovanni said. He's been using it for 8 months. He thinks we don't know about it. We've known for 6, Dante said. Sophia looked at him. You've been sitting on that information. I've been saving it. He met her eyes. In my world, you don't spend your best card until the hand that matters. Marco has been escalating for 2 years. Every provocation, every small territorial push, I absorbed it because responding to each one would have cost more than it gained. But now, he's killed 4 of my men. His voice didn't change in volume, but something beneath it shifted into a register that was absolute and cold and final. Now the hand matters. What's the timeline? Marco asked. We move in 72 hours. I want every exit covered, every route out of Red Hook controlled before we make a single move on the building itself. He looked at Luca. I want his communications cut 12 hours before. No calls out, no signals in. I want him completely blind. And Moretti himself? Giovanni asked. The question sat in the room for a moment. He made his choice, Dante said simply. No one asked a follow-up question. What followed was 3 days of the most concentrated tension Sophia had ever lived through. The townhouse operated at a different frequency, quieter on the surface, vibrating harder underneath. Men came and went at hours that had no pattern. Dante slept in 3-hour intervals and ate standing at his desk. Sophia matched his hours as closely as she could, partly because she understood instinctively that being present mattered, and partly because the alternative was lying in her enormous room, staring at a ceiling, while 4 dead men and her mother in a secure facility, and Marco Moretti's poisonous voice kept circling her brain without resolution. She trained with Victor every morning regardless. He pushed her harder than he had in the first week, and she pushed back, and on the second morning she put him on the mat, not cleanly, not without help from a mistake he'd half allowed her to exploit. But she put him down, and he stayed there for 1 full second before rising, and the look on his face was the closest to respect she'd earned from him yet. You got angry, he said. Is that good? Anger is fuel. Most people waste it. He rolled his shoulder. You used it. That is difference. Dante found her in the gym afterward, sitting on the edge of the mat with a towel around her neck, her breathing still uneven. He sat across from her without ceremony, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man carrying significant weight and choosing not to put it down. I need to tell you something, he said. She looked at him. Something in his voice had a different texture than usual. Giovanni found information this morning. He paused. About why Marco Moretti escalated when he did. Why now, after 2 years of smaller provocations? He held her gaze. He found out about you 3 weeks ago. Before you came here. Before I made any move. Sophia went still. Someone told him. Someone inside this house. The words landed like stones. I don't know yet who. I'm working to find out. But Marco knew you existed before I'd acknowledged you publicly. Someone told him that Dante Salvatore had a daughter he didn't know about, and Marco calculated that a daughter I'd just discovered would be the softest possible target, the fastest way to destabilize me. She processed this. He wasn't just responding to your strength. He was trying to exploit your weakness before you had time to turn it into something else. Yes. And the weakness was me. The weakness, Dante said firmly, was that someone in this house put information in enemy hands. You were never a weakness. You understand the difference. She did. But she sat with the other piece of it. The piece that meant someone in these walls had looked at her and seen an opportunity and made a call that resulted in 3 men walking toward her mother's hospital room. She sat with that and let it resolve into something useful rather than something paralyzing. Do you have a list of suspects? She asked. 3 names. Giovanni is narrowing it. His jaw tightened. When I know with certainty, it will be handled. I want to know who it is, Sophia said. When you find out, I want to know. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. You'll know. It was a small thing, the agreement to tell her to treat the information as hers to have. But in the architecture of what they were building between them, small things were the materials. She was beginning to understand that. The night before the Red Hook operation, Dante called her into his office at 9 in the evening, and she found her mother there. Elena was sitting in one of the leather chairs wrapped in a cardigan that was 2 sizes too large, her hands folded in her lap. She was thinner than the last time Sophia had seen her, but there was color in her face that hadn't been there in months. And her eyes when they found Sophia were clear and alert, and full of the particular guilt of a woman who has spent 3 weeks in a secure facility, thinking about every decision she has ever made. Sophia crossed the room and held her mother for a long time without speaking. Over Elena's shoulder she saw Dante standing at the window with his back to them, giving them the moment. Deliberately, she understood. He had arranged this deliberately, not because he was required to, but because he understood that Sophia needed to see her mother with her own eyes, and that Elena needed to see her daughter, and that some things between people can only be resolved through physical presence, and no amount of phone calls substitutes. She filed that away too. You look different, Elena said when they finally separated. Her hands cupped Sophia's face, the way they had when Sophia was small. You look... She stopped. Like him? Sophia asked. Elena's eyes moved briefly to Dante's back at the window. Like yourself, she said carefully. More like yourself than I've ever seen you. Dante turned then. He looked at Elena with the complicated expression of a man who has spent 25 years deciding how to feel about a specific person and has arrived at something he didn't fully predict. Not forgiveness, exactly, not absolution, but something adjacent to both that acknowledged the fullness of the history without being consumed by it. How are you feeling? He asked. His voice was measured, careful. Better. Elena's hands dropped from Sophia's face. The treatment, Dr. Richardson says the response is significant, better than expected. She paused. Thank you. I know I have no right to say that, and I know it doesn't come close to... It doesn't, Dante said. Not cruelly. Simply. Elena nodded. I know. The 3 of them sat in the kind of silence that only exists when the history between people is too large and too complicated to be spoken around, when the only honest thing is to let it exist in the room without trying to manage it. Sophia sat between them literally, her chair equidistant from her mother's and her father's, and felt the strange, specific weight of being the living proof of everything they had been to each other and everything they had cost each other. I have a question. Sophia said finally. She looked at her mother. Before you left. Before you took the money and ran. Did you have any idea what kind of man he would become without... She stopped, restructured. If you'd stayed. If I'd grown up here. Do you think it would have changed him? Elena was quiet for a long moment. I think about that, she said. I've thought about it for 24 years. She glanced at Dante, and something in the glance was old and careful and still despite everything intimate. I think you would have changed him. I think a daughter would have given him something to be other than what the life demanded. But I was 23 years old and terrified, and I couldn't afford to make decisions based on what might happen to him. Her voice softened. I could only see what would happen to you. And now? Sophia asked. What do you see now? Elena looked at her daughter, at the woman in the leather chair with her straight back and her steady eyes and her father's jaw, and something in her expression broke open, and then quietly rebuilt itself into something that was close to peace. I see someone who doesn't need protecting anymore, she said. That was all I ever wanted. Dante said nothing, but his hand resting on the arm of his chair closed into a slow fist and then released. The operation launched at 4 a.m. 3 cars, 12 men, all positions, established the night prior exactly as planned. Sophia rode in the second car with Marco and 2 others under instructions that were simple and absolute. She stayed in the vehicle unless told otherwise. She didn't argue, not because she was afraid, but because she understood the decision was tactical, not protective. She was not yet trained for field operations. Putting herself in an uncontrolled environment without the skill to match it wasn't bravery. It was liability. Dante had taught her the difference, and she had learned it. She watched through the window as the men moved in the gray pre-dawn dark, with the coordinated precision of people who had done this before and understood the cost of mistakes. The warehouse was surrounded in under 4 minutes. Communications had been dead for 12 hours. Marco Moretti had no idea what was outside his walls until it was already inside them. It ended faster than she expected. She heard it before she saw it. Sharp sounds that her brain registered before her emotions caught up, and she sat in the car with her hands flat on her thighs and breathed carefully and waited. Marco in the front seat was monitoring a radio earpiece, and his face told her by degrees what was happening inside. Then Dante's voice on the radio, 2 words clear and steady. It's done. The men came out in groups. 4 Moretti soldiers' hands secured, heads down. 2 of Dante's men assisting a third who was moving with the careful gait of someone managing pain, but managing it alive, which was the only thing that mattered. And then Dante walking out into the gray morning light with Marco Moretti in front of him. Moretti looked diminished. Not physically, he was still the same dark-eyed, rigid-jawed man from the restaurant, but something in his bearing had collapsed. The pride that had held him upright through 2 years of escalation and 1 dinner table threat and a warehouse raid had finally met something it couldn't maintain posture against. Dante stopped him in the open space between the building and the cars. He said something to him that Sophia couldn't hear. Moretti responded. Dante listened with complete stillness, and then he said something else short and final, and Moretti's face changed into an expression that Sophia recognized from her mother's face in the hospital room, the expression of someone who has run out of roads. One of Dante's men opened Sophia's car door. She got out. Dante looked across the distance at her. The morning was cold, and the light was thin, and his face in it was exactly what she had come to understand him to be: exhausted and absolute, and completely unwilling to be anything other than what the situation required. Moretti saw her then. His eyes moved from Dante to Sophia, and in them she saw the calculation happen in real time, the rapid assessment of whether she was something he could still use, whether her presence here was a variable he could exploit. She watched him decide, watched him open his mouth. "Your father," he started, "is standing right there," Sophia said. "Talk to him." Moretti looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then something behind his eyes went out like a pilot light extinguished, and he looked back at Dante and said nothing. Dante nodded once to Luca. She didn't watch what happened next, not because she couldn't bear it. She understood by now the mathematics of what men like Marco Moretti made inevitable when they chose the path they chose. She didn't watch because she was looking at her father's face instead, and what she saw there was the thing he had warned her about in his office on that first night. The cost. The specific physical cost of being the man who made these decisions and carried them forward and lived inside the consequences without the luxury of looking away. When it was over, Dante walked to where she stood. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Not broken, nothing about him bent, but carrying more weight than was visible. "It's done," he said. "I know." He looked at her carefully. "Are you?" "I'm all right." She said it and meant it, and watched him assess whether she meant it. "Are you?" The question surprised him. She could see it, a small fracture in the composure quickly sealed. He wasn't used to being asked. "I will be," he said. She nodded. They stood in the gray morning and said nothing else because nothing else was required, and she was learning that silence between them had become a language as fluent as any other. On the drive back, Dante received a call from Giovanni. She watched his face as he listened, and 3 seconds in she knew from the set of his jaw that whatever Giovanni was saying had changed something significant. He hung up and looked at her directly, which meant it was about her. "Giovanni found the informant," he said. She waited. "It was one of our senior men, someone who has been in this family for 11 years. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what was beneath it, the particular betrayal of someone trusted who chose otherwise. "He was paid by Moretti 6 months ago, before you arrived, before any of this." He held her gaze. "He's the reason Moretti knew about you. He's the reason 3 men walked toward your mother's hospital room." The anger came clean and cold. Not hot, not reactive, cold and structured. The kind of anger that doesn't dissipate, but sharpens into something usable. "What happens to him?" she asked. Dante's eyes were steady on hers. "What do you think should happen?" She understood the question. It wasn't rhetorical. He was asking her genuinely as the person who had been most directly harmed by this man's choice, and also as his heir, as the person who would one day have to make these decisions herself. She thought about it honestly, about the weight of it, and what mercy looked like in a world where mercy had a specific cost, and what it said about leadership to confuse compassion with weakness. "He chose to endanger my mother to profit himself," she said. "In your world, that has one answer." Dante studied her for a long moment. "That's correct." He paused. "It doesn't get easier making that call." "I know. But you made it without flinching." "I flinched," she said. "I just didn't stop." He was quiet for the remainder of the drive, and she understood that the quiet was a form of respect. Not for what had been decided that was simply the logic of the world they inhabited, but for the way she had held herself inside the decision. Without performance, without cruelty, without pretending the weight wasn't there. They reached the townhouse as the morning opened into full daylight. Giovanni was waiting in the foyer, his face composed and carrying the news that what needed to be handled had been handled. Dante received it with a nod and dismissed him. Then he turned to Sophia. Just the two of them in the entry hall, the house quiet around them, the city alive and indifferent outside. "I owe you an apology," he said. She blinked. Of everything she'd expected him to say, it wasn't that. For what? For the 24 years. He held her gaze without looking away from it, which she understood was costing him something. "I know I had no knowledge of them. I know the fault for that doesn't lie with me. But you grew up without resources, without safety, without anyone in your corner who had the power to actually protect you. And I had that power, and you didn't have access to it." He stopped. "That was a loss. For both of us. And I'm sorry for it." She looked at her father, this complicated, violent, fiercely loving man, who had rearranged the entire landscape of her life in 3 weeks, and she felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't known was unsettled. Something that had been slightly misaligned since she was old enough to understand that other people had fathers, and she did not. "We have time," she said. He nodded once, slowly. "Yes," he said. "We do." The apology stayed with Sophia longer than she expected. Not because she hadn't believed it, she had completely. Which was itself surprising, given that 3 weeks ago she hadn't known this man existed. But because of what it had cost him to say it. She'd watched enough people in enough difficult moments to understand the difference between an apology performed for the effect it creates and an apology pulled out of someone against the resistance of their own pride. Dante Salvatore did not apologize easily. She understood without being told that he had never apologized to anyone in this house, that the word itself was not part of the language of the life he'd built. He'd said it to her anyway. She was still thinking about that when Elena appeared in her doorway that evening, moving slowly but steadily, the cardigan replaced by something warmer, her color better than it had been in months. "You should be resting," Sophia said. "I've been resting for 3 weeks." Elena came in and sat on the edge of the bed the way she used to sit on the edge of Sophia's bed in every apartment they'd ever shared, anchoring herself to her daughter by proximity. "I heard you came back this morning, from Red Hook." Sophia looked at her. "You heard?" "Giovanni mentioned it." A pause. "He mentions things to me. I think Dante asked him to." Sophia filed that away. Of course he had. He was managing Elena's information carefully, giving her enough to not feel shut out, not enough to cause her more fear than was manageable. It was the same calibration he applied to everything. "Marco Moretti is dead," Sophia said plainly. There was no gentle way to say it, and her mother didn't need gentleness, she needed truth. They'd had enough of the other thing. "It's over." Elena absorbed this with the stillness of someone who had grown up in this world and understood its grammar, even after 25 years of trying to forget it. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Are you certain?" "I was there," Sophia said. "I didn't look away from what it was. And yes, I'm all right." She held her mother's gaze. "Does that frighten you? That I'm all right?" Elena was quiet for a long time, long enough that the silence had texture. "It frightens me the way all growth frightens mothers," she said finally. "Because it means you've moved past a place I can protect you from, and a mother never entirely makes peace with that." She reached out and took Sophia's hand. "But no, baby. It doesn't frighten me the way it would have 3 weeks ago. You know why?" "Tell me." "Because you know what you are. For the first time in your life, you know exactly what you are. And whatever I think about the world you're standing in, whatever terror I carry about it, I can see that you are standing in it with your eyes completely open." She squeezed Sophia's hand. "I ran because I couldn't face it. You are not running. That's the difference between you and me, and I want you to know I understand that difference and I am not ashamed of it. I'm proud of you for it." Sophia looked at her mother, at the face she'd known her entire life, thinner now and marked by illness, but still fundamentally her mother's face. Still the face that had been her entire world for 24 years, and she felt something complete itself. Not the anger, not the grief of the years, she hadn't known the truth. Not the complicated reckoning of the last 3 weeks. Something simpler than all of that. She felt seen by the one person whose seeing had always mattered most. "He apologized to me today," Sophia said. Elena went very still. "Dante. For the 24 years, for not being there." She watched her mother's face. "He said it was a loss for both of us." Something moved through Elena's expression that was old and private and not entirely resolved, and Sophia didn't push at it because some things between people had their own timeline and couldn't be accelerated by good intentions. "He's not wrong," Elena said quietly. "I know." They sat together in the dark, mother and daughter, holding the weight of everything that had brought them to this specific room in this specific life, and for the first time since the night in the diner, the weight felt like something that could be carried, rather than something that was carrying them. 3 days passed. The house recalibrated. The specific tension of the Moretti War drained out of the walls slowly the way tension does, when the source of it is resolved not all at once, but incrementally. Men standing slightly less rigidly, conversations in hallways lasting slightly longer. Dante sleeping 4 hours instead of 2. Giovanni produced paperwork. The surviving Moretti soldiers sent formal word through Don Russo that they accepted the outcome. Don Castellano, whose alliance with the Moretti family had always been transactional, sent a bottle of wine and a handwritten note that said nothing directly and communicated everything obliquely. Dante read it, set it aside, and told Giovanni to send Castellano a response that was equally indirect and twice as clear. Sofia was in the library when Dante found her on the 4th morning seated at the long table with maps spread across it and Giovanni's handwritten notes in the margins, and a legal pad where she'd been making her own notations in the shorthand she'd developed for herself over 3 weeks of learning. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. "You've been in here since 6, he said. "There's a lot to learn." He came in and sat across from her, the way he'd begun sitting in the gym, the way he'd begun positioning himself closer, more direct, less behind the desk, and more across the table from her. She'd noticed the shift. He hadn't drawn attention to it. "What are you working on?" "The Castellano situation." She pushed her legal pad across the table. "His alliance with Moretti was transactional, you said, which means he didn't fund it emotionally, he funded it strategically, which means now that Moretti is gone, he needs a new strategic position." She tapped her notes. "He sent that wine because he wants to know if the door is open. But the way you responded tells him the door is open on your terms, not his. So he's going to make a move that looks like goodwill, but is actually a request for terms." Dante looked at her notes for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "When did you work this out?" "Yesterday, after dinner." He was quiet. She had learned his silences well enough now to distinguish between them the calculating silence, the tired silence, the one that meant he was preparing to say something he'd been holding for a while. This one was the last kind. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "And I want you to listen completely before you respond. Can you do that?" She set her pen down. "Yes. In 2 weeks there is a gathering of the 5 families. It happens twice a year. Everyone who matters in this city will be in one room." He held her gaze. "I want to present you formally. Not the way I introduced you at the restaurant that was controlled small, a preliminary showing. This is different. This is the official acknowledgement. Sofia Salvatore, my heir, my blood, my named successor." He paused. "If I do that, there is no walking it back. Every person in that room will understand what it means. Your position becomes fixed. The protection it provides is absolute, and the target on your back doubles." She didn't respond immediately because she'd promised to listen. "The second thing," he continued. "Your mother. If she continues to respond to treatment the way Dr. Richardson expects, she'll be in full remission within 6 months. When she is, if she wants to remain here, she can. She'll have permanent security, permanent care, a place in this house for as long as she wants it." He stopped. "That offer has no conditions attached to your decision. It's hers regardless." Sofia looked at him. "Why are you telling me that separately?" "Because I want you to make your decision about the gathering without factoring in your mother's situation. I don't want you feeling coerced." He held her eyes steadily. "I want you choosing this life because you have chosen it, not because I maneuvered you into it." She sat with that. "You could have not said that," she said finally. "You could have let me believe the two things were connected. It would have made it simpler to get what you want." "Yes. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you are my daughter," he said. "And the only thing I have ever wanted from the moment I understood what you are is for you to be free inside whatever life you choose. Not free from consequence, nothing offers that, but free from manipulation. Free from the kind of coercion that your mother spent 24 years believing was the only thing this world could offer." He paused. "If you walk into that gathering in 2 weeks, I want it to be because you walked in, not because I pushed you through the door." The room was very quiet. Sofia thought about the diner, about the coffee pot in her hand, and the split sneaker, and the medical bills in the kitchen drawer, and the specific grinding exhaustion of being 24 years old and completely alone with a problem too large for one person to carry. She thought about what she'd been 3 weeks ago, and she thought about what she was now sitting across from her father in a library full of maps, making notations in the margins of a life she hadn't known existed. She thought about Victor on the training mat, about Isabella drilling Italian verb conjugations with patient relentlessness, about Giovanni's dry, precise lessons in the architecture of power, about Dante himself across a breakfast table every morning, asking her questions that were also gifts, because every question was a piece of knowledge, transferred a piece of the world she needed to understand, deposited directly into her hands. She thought about Marco Moretti's face when something behind his eyes went out. And she thought about standing in the gray morning afterward and not flinching, and not pretending the weight wasn't there, but not stopping either. "Yes," she said. Dante waited. Yes to the gathering. Yes to standing up in front of whoever needs to see it and letting them understand who I am. She held his gaze. "I'm not doing it because you asked me to. I'm doing it because 3 weeks ago I was invisible, and I am done being invisible. I am done being someone the world can ignore or overlook or threaten without consequence." She paused. "I am a Salvatore, and I want the room to know it." Something happened in his face that she had only seen once before on the morning in the gym when she'd told him she flinched but didn't stop, the infrastructure of a smile this time fully built. "Then we have 2 weeks to prepare," he said. What followed was the most compressed and demanding 2 weeks of her life, and her life had not previously been short on demanding. Dante shifted his teaching into a higher register. Not just the what of the family's world, but the how of navigating it at the level she would now be required to occupy. He ran her through scenarios, the way Victor ran her through techniques over and over, until the correct response became instinct rather than calculation. "Don Russo extends his hand first," he said one afternoon, walking her through the gathering's protocol. "You take it without hesitation. Firm, not aggressive. Eye contact through the full exchange. Don't smile until he smiles, let him set the register." And Castellano. He'll try to establish himself as a mentor figure, offer guidance, position himself as someone with experience you lack and could benefit from. Dante's voice was dry. Let him believe that's working. Smile appropriately. File everything he says. Don't give him anything real. He'll be looking for weakness. Everyone will be looking for weakness. That's the function of a room like this. Everyone assessing everyone else, constantly looking for the crack in the wall. He looked at her directly. The way you don't show weakness is not by performing strength. It's by being so completely certain of what you are that the question doesn't find purchase. There's nowhere for it to take hold. She worked on that. She worked on all of it. And in the spaces between the working, she sat with her mother in Elena's suite on the 3rd floor, and they talked in a way they never quite had before. Not with the managed distance of a daughter who understood her mother was keeping things from her, and a mother who understood her daughter knew. With the directness of two people who had finally run out of things to protect each other from. "Tell me about him," Sophia said one afternoon. "Before everything, when you were young." Elena smiled, and it was the complicated smile of someone revisiting something that holds both warmth and damage. "He was 25 when we met. Already running things for his father, not in charge yet, but being prepared for it. You could see it even then, the way he moved through a room, the way people organized themselves around him without being asked." She paused. "He used to bring me books. That was the thing nobody knew about. He'd ask what I was reading, and then the next time I saw him, there would be 2 more on the same subject. Never mentioned it, just left them." Sophia absorbed this. "He still does that. Giovanni told me when he found out you were sick, the first thing he did was research the treatment options himself. Before he contacted any doctors, he read everything he could find." Elena looked at her quietly for a moment. "I know," she said. "Dr. Richardson told me he'd already read 3 clinical studies before their first conversation." She stopped. "He's not who I would have chosen for you to have as a father, if I could have chosen. But he is who you have. And he loves you, Sophia. Completely without reservation, the way I told you he loves people." She held her daughter's gaze. "Don't waste that. Whatever else he is, don't waste that." The night before the gathering, Dante knocked on her door at 10 o'clock and came in carrying a flat velvet box which he set on the dresser without ceremony. She opened it. Inside, on dark fabric, was a ring. Silver heavy, the same antique craftsmanship as his own. The same vines and thorns curling around the same crowned lion, the same crossed swords beneath it. The third ring of the matching pair, not a copy she understood immediately. Looking at the age in the metal, the darkness in the grooves. The original. The ring that had been made for this moment 3 generations ago and had been waiting for a person to give it to. She looked up at him. It was commissioned when my grandfather made the first alliance with your mother's family, he said. 3 rings. 1 for the head of each family, 1 for the heir. It's been in a safe for 24 years. He held her gaze. It belongs to you. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She turned it in her fingers, feeling the carved detail of it. And then she put it on her right index finger, the same finger his was on, and it fit exactly. She looked at her hand, then at him. It was always going to be yours, he said quietly. Even when I didn't know you existed, this ring was always going to belong to someone. I just didn't know her name yet. She did not cry. She had decided some time ago that she was done with the kind of grief that expressed itself in tears, not because crying was weakness, but because she had cried every tear available to her in the period when crying was all she had. Now she had more than tears. Now she had a ring on her finger, and a father across the room, and a life that had opened from something small and drowning into something vast and demanding and completely undeniably hers. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow you meet the city. The gathering was held at a private club that didn't appear on any map, in a room that had hosted 50 years of decisions that shaped the world Sophia had been living in without knowing it. When they arrived, the room was already full, and it quieted when Dante walked in, the way rooms had been quieting for him his entire adult life. But this time it quieted differently, because this time he wasn't alone. She walked beside him, not behind him, beside him, and she felt every eye in the room find her and assess her and begin the rapid calculation of what she represented. She kept her shoulders back and her chin level, and her pace matched to his, and she looked at the room the way he'd taught her to look at rooms, taking in everything simultaneously and revealing nothing that wasn't intentional. Don Russo came to them first. He extended his hand and she took it, firm, direct eye contact, held through the full exchange. He smiled first. She smiled second. Sophia Salvatore, he said, and the name in his mouth was different than it had been in the restaurant. Settled. Accepted. You have your father's eyes. I've been told I have his jaw, she said. Russo laughed, genuine and warm, and something in the room shifted slightly at the sound of it, a recalibration. Because Russo's reaction carried weight, and everyone present understood that. Castellano came next, and she let him position himself as the mentor figure exactly as Dante had predicted, and she smiled appropriately and gave him nothing real, and filed everything he said. The evening moved. Conversation business, the complex social choreography of a room full of people who were simultaneously allies and threats. She navigated it with the particular focus of someone who has spent 3 weeks absorbing information specifically for this purpose, and twice she caught Dante watching her from across the room, with an expression she had learned to recognize, the one that meant she had done something correctly, that he hadn't explicitly taught her, that she'd extrapolated on her own. She was talking with 2 men she'd identified from the family maps as allied captains, when she felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. Not dramatic, subtle. The kind of shift that happens when something has been decided and the deciding has changed what the air is holding. She turned. Dante was standing at the center of the room, and he was looking at her, and around him the other men had gone quiet, in the way that meant something was about to be said. Gentlemen, he said, and his voice carried through the room, without effort, the way it always did. I want to mark something formally. For 50 years this family has stood on a foundation I built alone. Every alliance, every decision, every line I've held, and every price I've paid it has been mine to carry. He paused. That changes tonight. Every eye in the room was on Sophia. My daughter, Sofia Salvatore, is my named heir and my successor. When I make a decision, she is consulted. When I give an order, she understands its context. When I am not in a room, she speaks with my full authority." He held her gaze across the distance. "She has earned this. Not because of blood. Blood is an accident of biology. But because of who she is, what she is, and how she has chosen this life with her eyes completely open." He raised his glass. "To Sofia Salvatore," he said. "My daughter. My heir." The room answered him. Not reluctantly, not performatively, with the specific weight of people who understood what this moment formalized, and had already over the course of the evening made their peace with it. Don Russo's voice was among the first and loudest. Even Castellano raised his glass without visible hesitation, which told her everything she needed to know about where the room had landed. She held herself still through it. Not rigid present. Completely consciously present in her own life in a way she had never managed in 24 years of living it invisibly. Later, when the room had thinned and the night had deepened, Dante found her by the window and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. They looked out at the city together, at the lights of it, the enormity of it, the millions of lives running parallel to theirs inside it. "Your mother called while you were talking to Russo," he said. "Dr. Richardson's latest scan results came back." Her breath caught. "The tumor markers dropped 60%, he said. "Richardson calls it an exceptional response." He paused. "She's going to be all right." Sophia pressed her hand flat against the window glass and breathed, just breathed. Let the news arrive fully. Let it settle into every part of her that had been braced against a different outcome for 6 months. "She needs to know," Sophia said. "She already does. I called her immediately." She turned to look at him. "You called her yourself." "She's the mother of my child," he said simply. "That makes her family. I told you that on the first night." She looked at her father, at this man she had known for 3 weeks, and understood more completely than she had understood most people she'd known for years. Because crisis collapses the distance between people faster than any ordinary time, and what they had been through together was nothing if not crisis. And she felt the last piece of the thing she hadn't known was incomplete finally settle into its place. "I want to go see her," Sophia said. "The car is ready." She raised an eyebrow. "You knew I'd want to go tonight." "I know you," he said. And the simplicity of it, the complete unconflicted certainty of it, landed somewhere in her chest and stayed. Elena was awake when they arrived, sitting up in her bed with the lamp on and the phone in her hand, and her face carrying an expression Sophia had never seen on it before, not in all 24 years, not through all the difficulty and the secrecy and the fear. Pure, uncomplicated relief. The specific piece of a woman who has been running from something for half her life and has finally stopped. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, and her mother held her face in both hands, and they stayed like that without speaking, because some moments don't have words that fit them, and trying to make them fit diminishes the moment. Dante stood in the doorway. He didn't come in, didn't insert himself into what was happening. He simply stood at the threshold of the room where the 2 women who constituted the whole of his family were together. And he stayed there quietly. And it was enough. After a while, Elena looked past Sophia at him. Something passed between them. 25 years of it compressed into 3 seconds of eye contact. The betrayal and the grief and the love that had existed under all of it. The complicated truth of 2 people who had been shaped permanently by what they were to each other before everything went wrong. "Thank you," Elena said. He nodded. It was enough. It was all the language that situation had room for, and it was enough. On the drive home, the 3 of them in the same car for the first time, the city moved past them in its usual indifferent abundance. Sophia sat between them and held her mother's hand and watched the lights and felt the ring on her finger, heavy, warm, antique, and certain. And she thought about the diner, about the girl in the split sneaker with the coffee pot, and the medical bills, and the particular loneliness of a life that no one with any power had ever noticed. That girl had spoken 2 sentences to a stranger about a ring, and the world had opened. She didn't romanticize it. She understood what she was part of now, understood it without the gloss of fantasy, with the clear-eyed realism of someone who had watched a man she loved make decisions that had one-word answers and permanent consequences. She knew this life's cost. She had touched it directly and chosen it anyway, not in spite of the cost, but with full knowledge of it, because the alternative invisibility powerlessness, the grinding exhaustion of surviving alone, was the only thing she was no longer willing to be. She was Sofia Salvatore. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and 3 weeks of the most concentrated education a person could receive, and she had a ring on her finger that had been waiting for her for 24 years. She had a father who had read 3 clinical studies before calling a doctor, and who had stood at the threshold of a room to give her and her mother space, and who had said the word sorry like it cost him his own blood. She had a family. It was violent and complicated and built on foundations she would spend years fully understanding, and she was its future, and she was not afraid. The waitress from Rosie's diner was gone. She had walked out of that life the night she opened her mouth and spoke the truth out loud, and she had walked into this one, and she had not looked back. Sofia Salvatore looked at the city through the dark window of her father's car, and she recognized it finally completely as hers.